hatred can yield. As we continue to confront, it hurts to say, and I get very emotional, so forgive me. As we continue to confront the same anti-Semitism and racism, Kristallnacht provides an opportunity to remember, to reflect, to honor the victims, and take responsibility for working towards a future where intolerance and violence are not able to flourish. In other words, we say and we believe never again. Madame la députée de Darcy-McGee, Elizabeth Press, a d'ailleurs eu l'amabilité de nous adresser un message. Permettez-moi d'en lire un court extrait. À la lumière des attaques terroristes perpétrées par le Hamas le 7 octobre dernier, considérant la montée de l'antisémitisme et de l'intolérance dans notre société, il est particulièrement important de favoriser le dialogue et la compréhension afin de prévenir l'oppression sous toutes ses formes et immuniser les nouvelles générations contre la haine. Restons vigilantes et continuons à éduquer et à sensibiliser sur l'histoire qui a conduit à des nuits comme la nuit de cristal. Merci à Madame Cass. Mais l'histoire et la mémoire ne suffisent plus. Musée de société, nous devenons un musée d'actualité quand on constate la multiplication et la banalisation des pogroms. Jeudi dernier, dans la ville d'Anne Frank, les Juifs ont été victimes d'une véritable chasse à l'homme. À Londres, à Paris, Amsterdam ou La Haye, les Juifs sont aujourd'hui menacés et agressés. L'heure n'est plus simplement au devoir de mémoire, mais à la solidarité de notre communauté. We cannot ignore our local incidents, be they in front of our schools, our universities, or synagogues, as at the Shar HaShamayim just the other day. Even our own city has not seen fit to note this menace to our community. And we know this because its report called Accélérer le changement pour une ville exempte de racisme et de discrimination. So it's a report that talks about our city being exempt from racism and discrimination. And in it, there is not a mention of our community. At a time when anti-Semitism is rampant and at an all-time high, measured by our media, our security forces, and of course, our own community. We appreciate the members of parliament, the mayors, the government delegates that have a long history in being supportive of us, and we thank them for being here. But we as a museum at the heart of our community and our society need your support to maintain our democracy healthy. A night like this reinforces our need to flag this situation forcefully and to work towards using our expertise to mitigate the hatred that is being leveled at us. Thank you for being with us this evening as we present a very meaningful and reflective evening during this very stressful time. Je termine et je cède maintenant la parole à notre co-président, mon collègue, Jacques Sadat.
Mesdames et messieurs les dignitaires, permettez-moi tout d'abord de renforcer encore ce que ma collègue Ray vient de dire à propos de degrés auxquels on peut apprécier la présence de tous ici ce soir. Nous sommes réunis dans l'espoir, dans la conviction et dans la détermination à lutter contre toute forme d'antisémitisme. Merci encore de votre présence à tous. Pour ne pas mourir, il faut assassiner le silence. Every year around the world, we gather in synagogues and community centers and recall the horrendous events of November 9th, 10th, 1938. We remember that on those dates, the Nazi SS paramilitary forces, aided by German civilians, unleashed a pogrom against the Jews of Berlin, Vienna, Prague, and cities across the heart of Europe. They dragged Torah scrolls through the streets, torched over 1,000 synagogues, vandalized Jewish homes, businesses, and cemeteries, and murdered nearly 100 Jews. During these 2 nights, as Ray said it, as many as 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and deported to concentration camps. Les médias ont fait rapport de ces événements, mais les gouvernements se sont cachés. Lors de sa conférence de presse du 15 novembre 1938, on dit une semaine après Kristallnacht, le président américain, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a dénoncé l'attaque terroriste de l'Allemagne nazie contre les Juifs. Puis il a rappelé l'ambassadeur américain en Allemagne, Hugh Wilson. Les États-Unis ont été le seul pays à réagir. Au lieu d'affronter l'inacceptable et la sauvagerie, les autres ont choisi l'aveuglement volontaire. Ils ont choisi l'illusion d'un apaisement qui n'était en fait qu'une compromission, l'expression d'une faiblesse meurtrière. Ils ont ainsi ouvert toute grande la porte à la Shoah. Le 7 octobre 2023, des Juifs ont été agressés, violés, mutilés, exterminés parce qu'ils étaient Juifs. Nous aurions pu nous attendre à un tollé général, à une dénonciation radicale de cette sauvagerie sans nom, à une révolte devant des images insoutenables qui illustraient une brutalité antisémite dont nous avions l'illusion qu'elle avait disparu ou au moins qu'elle s'était marginalisée. Or, le soir même, nous commencions à voir des scènes de joie et de liesse dans la rue arabe, à Berlin, à Paris, à Londres ou à Montréal, des slogans qui rappelaient la haine de 1938. Le soir même, tout était devenu la faute des Juifs. La victime était instantanément devenue l'agresseur. Des dirigeants politiques s'empressèrent de dénoncer l'agression de France, mais en cherchant à l'expliquer. Pire, à la justifier. Quelle cause peut rester honorable quand elle justifie le viol, le meurtre ou le kidnapping de bébés? Il y a quelques jours, je regardais une émission de télévision en télévision littéraire avec Nicole, ma femme. Des auteurs parlaient de leurs livres, entre autres il y avait Kamal Daoud, pour lequel j'ai beaucoup de respect, et quelques autres auteurs. Et tout à coup, une romancière dont j'ai oublié le nom cite une phrase de Simin Debahani. Simin Debahani, c'est cette poétesse de la résistance iranienne disparue il y a quelques années. Et elle a prononcé cette phrase. Pour ne pas mourir, il faut assassiner le silence. Cette phrase aurait pu être le slogan de notre musée. En donnant la parole aux survivants, en enregistrant leurs témoignages, en invitant les générations à entendre leurs histoires, leurs souffrances et leurs espoirs, c'est le silence que nous cherchons à assassiner. In a speech delivered during the 2015 commemoration of Kristallnacht, the Israeli ambassador Danon declared, and I quote, Zachor doesn't just mean the recall of events of the past. Zachor means to learn the lessons of the past. Dachor means putting those lessons into practice. And Dachor means honoring those who live on in our memory. Remembering Kristallnacht means understanding that the demonization of a people leads to the dehumanization of the people, and finally, to the destruction of the people. End of quote. Tonight, we continue to honor the memory of our lost ones and speak about the dreams they could no longer dream, about the hopes that were shattered, about the hugs they could no longer give their grandchildren, about the grandchildren they would never have. We remember what was taken from them, their smiles, the serenity of Sunday mornings with a gentle awakening, the smell of coffee and a ballade by Chopin playing in the background, the soft wind caressing an expectant mother's cheek, the joyful anticipation of a young couple gently strolling in the park, holding hands as the midsummer sun declined, the pride of parents listening to their child playing piano, happiness. Tonight, we remember that happiness that was brutally taken from them, stolen from them, from all of us in 1938, 39, 1940, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, and in 2023. We must continue to seek strength in the resilience of our survivors. They epitomize the triumph of life over death, the power of the human mind. But we must also constantly reinvent ourselves to be relevant in the fight against the new anti-Semitism, which feels free to speak and to act unobliterated under the guise of anti-Zionism. The plague of anti-Semitism will never be eradicated. That's our people's destiny. Être juif, c'est accepter qu'il nous faudra toujours combattre le fléau de l'antisémitisme qui, comme un virus, cherche toujours à muter. Encore et encore, nous devons continuer de combattre les révisionnismes qui veulent nous voler notre histoire, nos identités et nos racines. Nous combattrons les agressions dans nos rues et nos campus où on nous tient responsables d'être juifs. Lutter avec tous les justes qui nous entourent. Lutter par la connaissance et la force de l'esprit. Telle est la grande mission de notre musée. It is not only a political ambition, it is a humanitarian ambition. Je vais maintenant passer la parole à notre grand ami, Paul Hirschen, le Conseil général d'Israël à Montréal. Paul.
Thank you, Jacques. I'm going to use the excuse of my jet lag. I just got back from Israel a few days ago for not acknowledging everybody that I should acknowledge. And I apologize to those of you who I don't. But I do want to just take a second to give a quick shout out to my colleagues and friends, Isabella and Suzanne, the Consuls General of Poland and Germany. Thank you for being here with us. Because I'm a diplomat, I'm not going to mention the fact that the mayor of Montreal doesn't attend events like this. Welcome to Amsterdam 2024, where it is currently not safe for a Jew to visit Anne Frank's house. Think about that. And not all that far away, where we have policies here in Montreal which have not encouraged, but have facilitated the ongoing growth and expression of anti-Semitism in the streets beyond a level that has ever been witnessed here in Montreal. You said just a few minutes ago that there are a number of people from government here on various different levels, federal, provincial, municipal, and that they've supported, and you wanted to acknowledge that. As you were saying that, I was thinking you were going to say to them, you want more, because that's what we really need from the elected officials, is we need more. But I just want to say, I was in Israel for 3.5 weeks. I got back a couple of days ago, 3-4 days ago, I got back. And I arrived in Israel, I hadn't been there for a year, and I arrived in Israel, of course, knowing we've just spent a year at war, and this is the conversation, and this is what it's all about. And relatively quickly, a few days after arriving, I understood that, yes, the hostages and the fallen soldiers consume almost 100% of the oxygen in the room. But it's not at home, it's out. The restaurants are packed to capacity. The shopping malls are packed to capacity. The wine bars and the coffee shops are packed to capacity. I don't know how to explain this, I'm not an economist, but I can tell you that there are new buildings that have gone up in the year that since I was last in Israel. I don't know who's building them. From the reports I've had, the construction workers are gone. There are new buildings that are up, and the traffic is as unbearable as it always was before. And so too here with the Jewish community in Montreal. You've been here 250 years or a little bit more, somebody's going to correct me. We don't run and we don't hide. We will continue to contribute to build the arts and music and theatre and the economy and generally the activities that we've done here for the last 250 years and in Israel today. We don't run and we don't hide. We finished being victims. So wonderful to be back. Thank you for inviting me tonight. Thank you for embracing me into this community. Am I introducing the next person, or am I handing over to Jacques?
I didn't do anything.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, I'll MC. My name is Sarah Fogg. I'm head of communications at the museum. I now have the honor of bringing up Anthony Housefather. He's a member of Parliament for Mount Royal, a familiar face, and he's been a true hero in this time. So thank you, Anthony. Please come on.
Thank you so much. And Ray, who I've known since I was just a little kid, and Jacques, who I've known since I was just a little bit older as a teenager. You're both inspirational, as are all of the survivors who are here today. I'm not saying Jacques is a survivor, by the way, but just wanted to say you're all inspirational to me. I wanted to just acknowledge Mayor Alan D'Souza of Saint Laurent, Mayor Mitchell Brownstein of Côte Saint Luc, and Mayor Jeremy Levi of Hempstead are here today as well. And I want to just thank all of the consul generals, all of the politicians at all levels of government who are here today. If there is ever a subject that requires nonpartisanship, if there is ever a subject that requires full support from everyone, it is the fight against hate, the fight against anti-Semitism. And Kristallnacht and the memory of Kristallnacht is something that I am very emotional about. I look at Eric Bissell, a survivor who came here and not only has donated so much to the community, but who came from Austria, a place that my great-great-grandparents came from. And I was just a couple of generations removed. If my great-great-grandparents hadn't come to Canada, I may never have existed. And so many never existed because of the Nuremberg laws that led to Kristallnacht, that led to the Wannsee Conference, that led to concentration camps and murders, that led to the Einsatzgruppen and the people that were murdered in cold blood in Ukraine. And it's a history that is so deeply disturbing. And it's so important that everyone of all faiths understands that history to prevent it from ever occurring again. J'étais très fier d'être partie de l'idée de construction d'un nouveau musée de l'Holocauste que Jacques et Daniel et les autres ont inspiré. I'm really proud that our government gave $20 million originally and $5 million again this year to $25 million to construct this museum. So that the lessons of the Holocaust are imparted to generation after generation. We've talked about what happened in Amsterdam. It is tragic that we live at a time that anti-Semitism is at a higher level than it has been since any time but the 1930s. In our lifetimes, of course. But what I would say is we live in a very different place than the 1930s. We might be unhappy with how governments have confronted anti-Semitism, but Kristallnacht was a government leading anti-Semitism. Kristallnacht was a government making anti-Semitism happen, throwing people into the streets and telling them to murder, to harm, to arrest. It was a state-sponsored anti-Semitism. That is not what is happening now. Our governments oppose anti-Semitism. They all do. We may not be happy with how they're doing it or satisfied, but that's why we go talk to them. I met with Mayor Plant a couple of weeks ago. I met with Mayor Chow this week. We need to engage. We need to intervene. And we need to fight back. But we, as a community, are strong. In the 1930s, Israel didn't exist. Now we have the state of Israel that will defend every Jew in the world. And we are fighting back against anti-Semitism because it's not enough to just remember the lessons of the Holocaust. We need to fight contemporary anti-Semitism, which morphs and is a threat to our national security and is a threat to our democracy. And just last week, we came out with the IRA handbook to combat anti-Semitism, something that Erwin Kotler, one of the greatest Canadians ever, started when he was our special envoy against anti-Semitism and has been continued by Deborah Lyons. And that handbook will teach all Canadians how to confront anti-Semitism, to recognize what is anti-Semitism, how to use the 4 parts of the IRA definition, how social, how companies in private business, how organizations that are community-based organizations, how schools and universities, and how governments all can recognize anti-Semitism and fight it back. And we as a community need to engage on that. We need to work with partners across the spectrum to ensure that Canadians recognize anti-Semitism, know when it's happening, and know how to fight back against it. And that's why we need allies. And there are many people in this room that are not Jewish. I see Mary Gallery, a counselor from Westmount here. I see all kinds of people here from other faiths who are fighting back with us. And that's the biggest difference from the 1930s. In the 1930s, it seemed that society was overwhelmed by anti-Semitic hate. Today, the vast majority of Canadians are on our side and abhor what's happening in our streets, and they will fight back with us. And that is the lesson that we need to convey. We will always fight back. Thank you.
In 1938, there were only about 500,000 Jews in all of Germany, which was less than 1% of the total population.
On November 9, 1938, we went to bed in a state of despair.
Many people are not aware of the historical fact that it was Hitler who planted the first seed leading to the Holocaust, when he personally ordered the destruction of the large liberal synagogue in Munich. Many people, myself included, believe Kristallnacht was the beginning of the Holocaust era.
Kristallnacht was a gateway to the Holocaust, for after that nothing stopped the Nazis.
I myself only know that on the Kurfürstendamm, which is the Champs-Élysées of Berlin, that any store, any boutique owned by Jews was destroyed. There were diamond stores, there were high fashion stores, and all that was destroyed.
Sometime after midnight, there was a big bang on the living room window. I could see the silhouette of a man standing on the exterior staircase. It was a man from upstairs. He was yelling, "Steht auf, steht auf! Die Synagoge brennt! Get up, the synagogue is burning!" Later we learned that the crowds were standing in front of our house because the access to the synagogue was blocked by the police and the fire brigade. They were not there to extinguish the fire, but to protect the other buildings around in case the fire spread.
Hitler used the Kristallnacht tragedy to test if the world really cared.
The streets were full of hooligans and bystanders. Very few made an attempt to help.
I was in Berlin on Kristallnacht. It was scary. I tried to avoid walking over shards of glass and saw it all. I watched the synagogue on Fasanstraße burning out of the window of the elevated train I was traveling in.
I saw the dying embers of 4 synagogues situated in the Schulhof or synagogue square, little tanks of flames still licking at the piles of timber.
I could taste the smoke.
The crimson sky over the synagogue was very visible. Everybody knew at once what I had heard from the man upstairs was true. Everybody was silent.
The silence on that morning was palpable. The kind of silence there is after a heavy thunderstorm.
Shortly after, we heard noise coming from the gate and saw 3 Gestapo officers in leather coat. They were breaking the front gate open with a crowbar. They came to arrest my father. By nightfall, it became known that the men were taken to the Dachau concentration camp. In no time, it became clear this was a nationwide horror that had befallen the Jewish community.
30,000 Jews were arrested, most of them sent to concentration camps, and at least 91 people were killed during those 2 days.
The German government deported in one swoop some 17,000 Polish Jews residing in Germany. German Jews were arrested and sent to 3 concentration camps in Germany: Dachau, Sachsenhausen, and Buchenwald.
When the fire was extinguished, the bystanders completed the destruction of the synagogue. They even dynamited the place, but part of the structure did not fall. It took them 10 days to finish the job. We had to pass by the place every single day and remember with what joy people demolished our synagogue.
They were quite happy that those rich Jews were finally punished.
It was not just the synagogue itself that was attacked, but the whole Jewish community.
Unfortunately, there was not much help from anyone. The Germans just stood by, watched what was going on.
Nobody else in the world did anything, as far as I can remember. The Jews of Germany had to leave the country as quickly as possible.
In Berlin, there was the Neue Synagogue in the Oranienburger Straße. And when it was set on fire, the fire chief, who was in charge for that district, disobeyed orders and went and asked his firemen to put out the fire. And he did. His name was Wilhelm Kreuzfeld. He found a document which said that any building of great cultural value had to be saved. So he ordered his police, his firemen to go to the synagogue. He went with them, and when the stormtroopers protested, he showed them the document, he shoved them aside, and he put out the fire. This synagogue was not destroyed, it's standing today, and as a matter of fact, in 1939, a year later, the Rosh Hashanah service, the last services were held there for Rosh Hashanah.
About 7,000 Jewish businesses were looted, and about 250 synagogues were burnt or destroyed.
I witnessed the destruction of the liberal synagogue in Munich, June 1938. I survived a deportation. I witnessed the destruction of many synagogues in my hometown. I was there. I understood. And I grew up fast during these fateful Kristallnacht days.
It happened, therefore it can happen again. This is the core of what we have to say.
We, the survivors and witnesses to this madness, don't need commemoration. We live it. The events are engraved in our minds forever, and the dreams that keep popping up unannounced and unexpected, don't let us forget. But the world needs commemoration. It has to be reminded of the past in order to make sure that such tragedies will not happen again.
We must be aware of it and never forget that it happened in a country that was considered to be civilized, the country of Goethe, Schiller, Beethoven, Bach, and many others. Today, anti-Semitism is rising globally at an alarming rate. Who can stop it and how? We have to be vigilant. We must teach tolerance in schools and hope that one day the world will be a better and saner place for all.
Hopefully, today's youth will stand up against injustice and hatred and not let such horrors happen again.
I now have the honor of introducing is the Guardian World Affairs editor based in London after 8 years in Washington. He covered the Bosnian War for the BBC and the Guardian and returned to the Balkans to report on the Kosovo conflict in 1999. He has also served as the Guardian's Middle East correspondent and its Washington bureau chief. Borger was part of the Guardian team that won the 2014 Pulitzer Prize for Public Service Journalism for its coverage of the Snowden files of mass surveillance. He was also on the team awarded the 2013 Investigative Reporters and Editors Medal and the Paul Foote Special Investigation Award in the UK. He won the One World Media Press Award in 2016 for a feature story on the investigation of war crimes in Syria. Our moderator, Tara Schwartz, is an expert communications and media trainer. She helps individuals and organizations prepare for presentations, speeches, interviews, and media. Tara spent more than 2 decades as a reporter and news anchor for CTV television. She has interviewed hundreds of people, hosted multiple events, and moderated panels of all kinds. Tara has won 4 Canadian Journalism Awards. She has been named a Woman of Influence by NAMAT Canada and is currently the Vice President of Communications and Marketing of the MUHC Foundation. Tara is also a published author. Her first book, a memoir on her difficult path to motherhood, was published in April 2022. It's called Can't Help Falling, A Long Road to Motherhood. The floor is yours, Tara and Julian. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. On behalf of Julian and myself, I just want to say it's a true privilege and a pleasure to be here today, marking this evening, marking this moment in history when it is a time that the world needs a lot of love. So thank you very much for having us tonight.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. It's working. And yeah, huge honor to be here, and my first time in Montreal. And what a great city it is.
So I realized that myself, my mother, and a couple of other people are the only people in the room who have read this book. So we will endeavor to help you walk through this book with us so that you will, when it comes out in April of 2025, you'll be able to say, oh, I spoke with that author. So we're going to give you a preview. So Julian, I thought the best thing to do, since most of the people here haven't read the book, is for you to give us sort of the context of what the book is about. So when we dive into the questions, we'll have a good round idea of what the book is about.
Yes, it's a book that started when the archivist of The Guardian found an advert in the Manchester Guardian from August 1938. And it was an advert for my father. His grandparents were advertising him, looking for a foster parent, foster family in the UK. It was August was already 5 months after the Anschluss. The Nazis were already there. People were beginning to realize that the trajectory of the events, and so this discovery of this advert led me to look through the pages of Manchester Guardian, the classified ads, where other children were being advertised among the adverts for lawnmowers and recruitments for ads for typists and so on. There were these children being advertised, and the emotional force of these adverts was just extraordinary, because these were parents trying to find the words in a foreign language, appealing to foreign families who they'd never met, reaching out to them in the hope that they would save their child. And so my father's advert was, I see a kind person, the name of the book, who will educate my intelligent boy aged 11, fear these a good family, as if that would make some kind of difference. And so the book is about what happened to these 80 children, in particular, 7 children who left very full accounts of their lives on what happened to them. And one ended up in the Shanghai ghetto, which is an extraordinary story, an episode. It's not so well known, but it's an amazing story. One came back as part of the US Army looking for remnants of the SS in the woods of Germany. Another didn't get as far as Britain, ended up in Vegetable concentration camp, then Theresienstadt, and then Auschwitz survived them all. And so it tells the stories of these children in the end.
So as Julian mentioned, the story really weaves around these families who had to go, and I think all the parents in the room would agree, this unimaginable act of having to say, please take my children, because they are so afraid for their lives. And I wonder, through these sort of excavation of finding and digging through the stories that made up this book, what did you learn about the parents that had to make that ultimate sacrifice, losing their children?
Yeah, looking at all the case studies, what really came out was it was in that era, 38, 39, it was the pessimists who were more likely to survive, because there were so many people in Vienna saying, this is not going to last. We are a civilized people. This is Austria. This is Vienna. These guys have arrived, but it's not going to last. And those people also who had something to lose. So it tended to be the better off who would wait, because they built up these businesses over their lives, and they waited. And at one point, departure became impossible. And the terrible thing, the thing that really stuck with these children who traveled out separately because they had sponsored who took them in the UK, is on arrival, their first job was to save their parents. And they were 13 or 14 years old. Their first mission was to find people, families, businesses who would sponsor their parents so that they could get them out. And for those who failed, it stayed with them as a burden for the rest of their life.
One of the interesting things, and as you get to read the book when it comes out, one of the really interesting things is he tells the story of the people who got out, was that they revisit over and over again that just because you got out, it doesn't mean that you escaped. And I would love you to talk a little bit to that sentiment. What did it mean to you? What did it come to mean to you?
Yeah, that is true. I mean, I think one of the things that really came through to me in doing the research for this book is that the violence of conflict is only the very beginning of the impact of war. And the war, in terms of trauma, inherited trauma that is passed on from generation to generation, is as much part of war as the violence on the day. And it makes me, covering wars now, to be much more sensitive to that, and looking at refugees, especially children refugees and who are escaping situations of intense traumatic violence. That this is a legacy being left that will spread into generations. But equally, I'm doing the research for this book, and particularly looking at the family who took in my father. They were a couple of Welsh teachers in Carnarvon, that also acts of kindness, human acts of kindness, have that same power to echo through the generations. So there are things that we can do in the face of violence, war, oppression, that will have a legacy as much as the legacy of war.
Absolutely. And I'm not going to be, giving anything away or offering any spoiler alerts, but when you read the opening of the book, the first couple of pages, Julian, it is so fast and powerful and heartfelt and intense. And basically he recounts up to the moment that your father took his own life. And I'm wondering, why did you decide to start the book that way? Openings, I think they're so important, how we begin something. And I'm curious, as an author, as a journalist, as a researcher, why did you decide to start that way?
I think that was the moment when obviously a pivotal, crucial, critical moment in my life, but also my understanding of what happened to my father, in that my father was of that leading and of that generation that dealt with the background of Holocaust by in just complete silence. It was not mentioned. We knew the basic facts, of course. He was from Vienna, had come, brought up with these nice people in Wales, but he would brook no conversation, refused to teach us German, and also gave the impression that our family had somehow got out of it scot-free, intact, which, when I came to do the research, was just not true. We just stopped talking about the people who perished. And so when my father died, one of my jobs was to ring around the people who knew him, his friends. The last call I made was to Nance Bingley, the woman who'd taken him in 1938. And her immediate reaction was, he is the Nazi's latest victim. They caught up with him in the end, which was a complete shock to me because, it was not something that was part of our lives. We didn't talk about it. But I have to, admit, it was many decades later with the chance discovery of this of this advert that I started to really dig and understand where he'd come from, what he'd been through, all the things that our family had never talked about.
And it's interesting to continue with that, is that I think it was Gertrude, one of the people in the book, who talked about something that I thought was so interesting. She said, we didn't suffer. We weren't cold. We weren't hungry. We escaped. And in a way, Gertrude felt that talking about her pain wasn't justified because it wasn't so acute, because they made it out. And I'm sort of curious, again, like in the research that you've done and the people that you met, what did that say to you? Because your father was one of the ones who made it out, right? But didn't.
Yeah, so he would have totally rejected the idea of Holocaust survivor. And another survivor who came from the same district around the corner, 3rd district of Vienna, George Mandler, who went on to become, like my father, a psychologist. It's really interesting about that in his memoirs. He had this argument with his sister, are we Holocaust survivors or not? And obviously the burden of survivorhood is a form, of the trauma, because of all those people, you left behind. It is definitely a trauma burden caused by the Holocaust, even though, they were not in the camps. But yes, there was very much a belief that, if you hadn't gone through the camp, then what have you got to complain of? You've got a great life. But many people, and most of the people who survived, went on to lead happy and joyful lives, they started new families. But some, like my father, weren't able, I think, to carry what they brought with them from that era.
You also found multiple very, very precious memoirs, George's and Yehudit's. A beautiful quote from Yehudit's memoir, and I'm going to read it out here. She said, I feel half of me is fighting and the other half is trying to forget. And I wonder, in having met these people, do you feel that what they were trying to do with these memoirs is almost find a place to put it, to put their pain, to put it on paper so that it would have some place to live? Like, is that what you felt as you sort of uncovered these memoirs?
Well, Yehudit, she was Gertrude Bacher and became Yehudit Segal. She entitled that memoir, which was just of her family, Because You Wanted to Know. I meant she was being badgered so much by her children, and in particular by a new daughter-in-law, that she sort of finally gave in and sat down and wrote it. But like many of these survivors, they weren't keen on making a song and dance about it because they hadn't been in the camp, except one of them, Fred Schwartz, who survived every camp there was with his brother and wrote an extraordinary book that is only in Dutch, printed in Dutch, called Trains on a Dead Track, which is an extraordinary book, and I've written about that, but I really hope that eventually it is printed in English. But most of them actually only came around to talking about it in later life, when they realized maybe they weren't being able to outrun it, and also there was a danger of it being forgotten. And I think, my father didn't live that long, but I'd like to think that he would have come around and been able to talk about it and just sort of let that burden go.
I'd like to think that too. You are a journalist, you are a researcher, you dig for stories. I'm wondering, and when you read this book, you'll see it is incredibly well researched. There's so much detail, and it goes very, very deep. I'm wondering, did you ever feel as you were sort of gathering all the information to put this together that you were chasing ghosts in a way? Because there's so many people that you touch, and I'm wondering if you ever felt that way.
Yes, but I mean, definitionally, I think I was chasing ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
I was, just desperate. I would find one of the children from the advert still alive, and I missed one guy who was in Israel by 2 weeks. I found this number, and rang this number, and the son answered and said, with 2 weeks later he died. But then very much at the end, when I was going through a kind of another scrub through all the names of people looking for leads to find someone, I got through to someone in New York, and he said, yeah, that's my mum. Would you like to talk to her? Which was just wonderful, because she was almost exactly the same age as my dad, had lived that same life, and I had those same experiences. And so to be able to talk to an eyewitness finally, when I'd kind of given up hope of finding someone still alive, was extraordinary. The whole thing was very emotional, but that was very much the most extraordinary moment.
That definitely would be. There were also many moments in the book where I had to stop and I had to close my eyes and put it down, because some of the moments were very intense. And I want to read you. I'm considering now that I know that you haven't read the book, I'm glad that I pulled out a few quotes from the book to read to you. And here's one. And this was a quote by George, who we've already mentioned. And it kind of fits back to what we were just listening to in the movie that we watched. I think this will resonate. He says, I carry the Holocaust with me and object to having been told that I have to be reminded about it. So I don't read Holocaust books and I don't see Holocaust movies. I know, and that is enough. And I wonder, when you read that kind of thing, I want to bring it back to you for a moment. What did you learn about yourself in putting together and ultimately releasing this book?
I found a lot about my family that we just did not know because of this blanket of silence. The whole lot of detail about my family's time in Vienna in those critical months after Anschluss, living under the Nazis, were kind of hidden in a Welsh memoir by a girl who'd gone to school with my dad when he went to school in Carnarvon, and it was before he sort of shut up about the whole thing, was still talking. And so how my great-grandmother's piano was thrown out onto the street, how my father was chased through the streets by the SA, how they hid gemstones in their heels because everything was being stripped from them when they left. All this detail, these things you thought maybe we would talk about, had been in this Welsh memoir, unreadable to me, and I didn't even know about it until I started asking questions. They said, well, have you read this? And the other thing was, we had this great aunt called Malchi from Vienna, who would the only member of the family who went back to Vienna. And we all thought she was a sort of rather comic figure, because she dressed like it was still the 1930s, one in his long hats with a feather out, and these shin boots, lace-up shin boots, and we would come, us boys would have to hide our toy pistols away and things like that, because she had lived through it. I realized when I came to do this research, we knew nothing about her. And it's only when I went into the resistance archives in Vienna I realized that she was part of a Austrian cell within the French resistance. And her son had been tortured to death by the Gestapo. He'd been part of the cell. The cell had all been given away by a stupid slip by one of their members. And so the whole network was rolled up. He was tortured to death. And of course, because they were so great at keeping records, that all these records were still there, his death and the toing and froing between the SS, the Gestapo, got to keep this guy alive. Sorry, he's dead. And I had no idea about, the part of our family. Not only, had my grandfather been smart enough to get the family out in time, but part of the family kind of had stayed and resisted in France. And also, I realized that her son, Monty Mordecai, was tortured to death. Well, when I went back to look at old photographs, it was clear that he was more than a cousin to my father. He was like a big brother. And it was so, so strange that we didn't have his picture on our wall. He wasn't talked about. And so, it made me realize, how much had been buried under the silence. A very long answer.
It's a great answer. And I'm curious as well, like it's so hard, I would imagine it's so hard to write a book about a time in history that is so horrific. And I wonder, does it make it harder that you were writing about your own family and not some distant relative, but your father?
Yeah, definitely the moving spirit, which made me, well, first write a long newspaper article, and then I was asked if I wanted to make it a book. What really drove me was coming across these extraordinary stories of Shanghai, of chasing the remnants of the SS, and of this amazing story of survival of the concentration camps. And then I realized if I'm going to write this book and write these stories, the price I have to pay is to go back and talk about my father, which is a painful thing to do, painful for my mum, painful for my siblings. And so in a way that was very much the price, but so glad I did it, because everything, if it hadn't happened, if I hadn't come across this advert, then all the things that my family had gone through, great aunt and her son, would literally have been forgotten. And in doing the research, I went to the Central Cemetery in Vienna, where these people are buried, and on them it says unforgotten, which had been a kind of promise that we had broken by failing to remember. And so it was an enormous joy to be able to write this, and to be able to give proper respect and acknowledgement to these people who've gone before.
I think that's such a beautiful way to see it. And I think he's already explained that the title of his book comes from the advertisement that was advertising his father, which was "I Seek a Kind Person." Such a beautiful title. What did you learn about the families who said, yes, we'll take your children? What did you learn about them? Because that's unusual too, to say, yeah, I'll take in a child. That's not right.
Yes, and what I found out was it was not a black and white story. These were not untrammeled acts of kindness. In the case of my father, it absolutely was. These wonderful people. The father, the husband, took a year off to tutor my dad. So by the time he went to school, they thought he was just, he was English. He wasn't Welsh, but they thought he was English. And he went on to he went to university age of 16, after this sort of tutoring that he did. They were the kindest people he could possibly have hoped to have found. But there were others where the picture is more mixed, where in the case of Gertrude Pacha, who became Segal, taken in by this rather well-to-do middle-class family in the provinces in the UK. And after this initial act of kindness of taking her in, she was exploited as child labor, and she had to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and start cleaning before everyone was up. And most importantly, this family who made a big thing about their philanthropy and a women's institute in the local town, when it came to her appeals to save her parents, to organize some sponsorship, they weren't interested. And largely because of that, they died, and Gertrude had to bear the burden of not being able to having saved her children. So it is very much a mixed picture, but there's a lot of the children who came had really painful, difficult experience.
And picking up on that, did you learn something about resilience? We always talk about children, they're so resilient, they will rally up and they will adjust. Like, did you learn something about all the children that came through and how they were able to cope with what seems horrible suffering for a child to be pulled away from their parents, their family, put in a new country? What did you learn about resilience? Like, what did you find?
Yeah, the children are incredibly resilient. Human beings are extraordinarily resilient. I found that my father, in a way, he ultimately broke, but for other pressures as well. He was unusual. The fighting spirit of the people involved, and just the determination to live, but not just exist, but to live and to bring joy again, and to have build families again, and live life to the full. Never, it was constantly amazing. These people did not back up.
I agree. It is amazing. You had the opportunity, and it's so nice that you see it as a joy now of having had this opportunity to look back and see a different side of your father's life. And to your point, I think it's a theme here, like that it was not forgotten, because how horrible would it have been if it had been forgotten? I'm wondering, did you find what you were looking for in a way? Were you looking for something? Did you find compassion for your father? Did you find forgiveness? Did you find acceptance? Like, as you bring the book into the world, and obviously you're losing your father was a very traumatic moment, and it would be for anyone. Did you find those things?
Yeah, what I found is greater understanding. In a way, I suppose I've found out, I kind of discovered in the doing of the research, at the same time that I was angry about it, at the same time as I found ways to understand it and to see him in another light. So yes, it's been the hardest of all. It's been on my mother, who lived through this. Had to kind of keep the family together after this happened. The terrible thing is it was put on Audible. It's already published in the UK. And there's an Audible version, so we thought we'd get the Audible version. And so we loaded it up, but she didn't understand how to do resume play. So every time she would start, it would take her back to the beginning, which is when my father would take his life, and it was like some terrible torture. That every time she wanted to listen to it, it would take her back to that moment. So in a way, yes, it was definitely hardest on her.
Did you ever wonder why your father wasn't able to speak about it or didn't want to speak about it? Do you think you have answers now that you might not have had before?
I think there are many and various. I think he wanted to become an Englishman, and an Englishman, an academic, and he saw, I think, came to see being this refugee, who was called Bobby. It would have been outrageous for him. He was called Robert, but it would have been outrageous for him, Bobby. And we never knew until I started research. He was actually called Bobby, for the first 12 years of his life. He clearly shut the door on that. And we had a family that was just assimilationist over generations. Sought, first of all, to get to Vienna from what's that? Galicia, which is now Ukraine, and Moravia. Get to Vienna, get on, blend in. The old Jewish families, who've been there for a few generations, hated it when the Ostjuden came in from Poland, with their looking Jewish, with their black hats and sidelocks. They hated them because they were reminding the people around them that they were Jews. And so I think that it is it was an inherited trait from my family to assimilate in a new place. My father just wanted to very deep, not be spotted, and so that was why he closed. I think, and also there was something that the others said. The other people who've written memoirs said often they don't want to hand on a burden. They see it as a burden. they witness unspeakable things, their children should be free of it. And I think that for some was also a motive not to talk about it. This feeling of handing on something that should stop with you.
I'm sure there's a lot of people who can relate to that sentiment, right? It's a tough one. And I think we understand both sides of it, the wanting to not pass on the burden and the children feeling like they have, you know, the privilege of having it as well as sharing it, right? Sharing that burden, it's part of passing it down. We don't often get, as people, the opportunity to meet and speak to people who knew our parents, and you had the opportunity to talk to people who actually knew your father and gave you different insights into who he was as a person. That must have been very special.
Yes, just talking to people who knew him as a kid in Carnarvon was really interesting. So that's before he kind of closed up the doors, and then finding this memoir. You know, you see people in another light, and one of the things that was made me see him in another light as well, and also realize why. When I called Nance Bingley when he died, her saying he was the Nazi dance victim, that she had a reason to say that in particular, because something I didn't know until almost the end of doing the research is the last thing he did after leaving our house was to go and see Nance, the person who had known him as an 11-year-old refugee boy. Out of all the people he knew in London, it was a revisiting of his boyhood. So that when I called her a few days later to say my father had died, she really, because she'd been, sorry, I should have said she had been away. He'd gone to try and find her. She was away, very unusually. She'd gone back to Wales for the long weekend, and so he sat in his car for a while outside. Her daughter-in-law came. After a while, gave him tea, and then he just left, and no one saw him again alive. So when I told Nance that, this is why I think that she was so determined that it was about his youth and about what he'd gone through in Austria, is because that is what he wanted to come back to as, you know, his sort of final thought.
What do you hope the reader will take away from your book? What do you hope will stay with the reader once they close the last page?
That makes me kind of repeat myself in that something I brought up earlier, and that is the extraordinary impact through generations of acts of kindness, of going beyond and reaching out in a way that goes beyond the sort of the norms of society, that the impact that can have on other people's lives that will survive generations and generations after you're gone. I would like that to be the kind of the dominant theme that comes out at the end, a positive one, and one that kind of sets apart about how we should act. If I measure myself against Nance Bingley, I can only feel, completely with a very long way to go in terms of becoming that person. But it gives me something to aim for.
What is something absolutely unexpected that you discovered while researching, learning, writing, meeting?
Oh, I would have thought my aunt being in the receptionist was the biggest thing for me, but we were terrible. We kind of sort of made fun. It seems like such a figure of fun, and no one mentioned. And she was actually a complete hero, and all the evidence of that was lying in the archives of the Resistance Museum in Vienna, but completely unbeknownst to her own family.
You are going to get an opportunity to speak to Julian, and I just have one more question. And then if you have them, please feel free to reach out to him, because it is going to be your opportunity to ask the question. I am someone who absolutely loves to read the dedication and then the epilogue. Does everybody do that here? I just love it, right? So I'm going to read you a line from his epilogue, and when read the book yourself. Oh, remember that. So this was his line. It's beautiful. The dead cannot tell their stories, so the recounting of history skews toward the hopeful. Perhaps it would be unbearable if it did not. And I want you to talk to that, like why those words, because they are truly beautiful.
Well, it made me realize something I should have known, but made me realize by doing this research that however dark view our image of the Holocaust is, it is an impossibly rosy picture because all the stories we get from the survivors. And yes, maybe the alternative to knowing all the stories where the person did not survive, they were given away by the person who was supposed to be hiding them. Perhaps that would be just unbearable for us. But it's worth bearing in mind that whatever we think about our view of the Holocaust, it is an impossibly rosy picture skewed towards the stories of survival.
I love it. I love it. For me, that's a beautiful place to end my questions. Thank you for your time with me today. I pass the platform to you. Is there somebody, you can just raise your hand and they will come along with the microphone and you'll have the opportunity to ask a couple questions. At the back there. Perfect. Why don't you stand up, sir? Stand up so we can see.
What year was your father born? What year did he end his life?
He was born in 1927. He was 11 when he came to the United Kingdom, and he ended his life in 1983.
What age was he?
He was 56.
Who else would like to ask Julian a question? Why don't you stand up, sir?
Hi, hello. Thank you. Very interesting. I think it's very important for everyone to hear those stories. Very relevant. I would like just to congratulate the German councilman, which is here, because Germany today passed a law blocking any funds to entities in Germany that boycott Israel. So I think it's very important for everyone with us here. You said it's amazing the type of research that you did. So amazing. And my question is, you work at the Guardian, I guess, and for a few months you have been denying the participation of UNRWA on the horrors of what went on against the Israelis. So do you have a take on that? Can you update us a little bit if you did some more digging to find out what UNRWA did on the 7th of October? Thank you.
I'm going to jump in here and I'm going to say that this time that we have together is really about this book and the beauty that has come out from it and that it is not forgotten. So while I deeply respect your questions, I'm going to bring us back to Julian and the moments that we don't want to forget. Is there somebody here that would like to ask a question? Oh, we've got this young lady here who's been nodding through much of this interview, which has been nice to see. What is your question?
Thank you so much. It was absolutely fascinating. I'm wondering how many adverts were placed for children at that time, and also if you know of other cities, not just Vienna, that actually also families that tried to put in adverts in UK papers. Thank you.
The answer for the Manchester Guardian was 18, but there were many others who were adults looking for a way out. And my grandmother got out by advertising herself as a domestic worker, a maid, and so a lot of women got out from Berlin, from Prague, from Vienna as maids. It was tougher for the men because there were a lot of middle-class families in England who could have a maid, but have a butler or a chauffeur was a whole other level there. So it was tougher. There were others in the Jewish Chronicle. I just focused in on Manchester Guardian because it's my paper and it's where my dad was advertised. But there were others in the Jewish Chronicle. But we, talking about scores. There were 80 in the Guardian, less in the Jewish Chronicle, few in the Telegraph, and so on. So I'm probably, if I was to guess, a ballpark figure of the total who went that way is about 200, 250 children. why it was mostly Vienna, and the reason why is the IKG, the Jewish community organization in Vienna, after the Anschluss, set up a kind of one-stop shop to get out, and they made this decision, which was a really hard decision, to cooperate in some degree with the Nazi authorities, and the belief that the alternative would be worse. And so the IKG would help with the process of getting out, and would liaise with Eichmann's office in Vienna to organize all the bureaucracy. And it was the IKG who suggested what you can do is put these adverts in. And so it tended, most of them, like in The Guardian, all of them were from Vienna.
Incredible. Questions on this side of the room? I feel we haven't gone to this side. Yes, beautiful lady.
So a very basic and practical question. When will the book be available and how soon? And do we have to write to relatives in England?
I'm giving you mine. There you go.
Yes, it came out in Britain and Australia in January, and in Vienna, in Austria in October, and for some reason the US publisher wanted to do it this coming January, and then realized publication date would be January 21st, which would be one day into the new administration in the US, and maybe it's not going to be what's on everyone's mind, so it's being put back to April. There are ways of ordering off Amazon.co.uk where you pay the shipping and so on, but yes, in terms of North America, it's not being published until April, but
it's coming. It's coming. And it's interesting because I was going to ask him to sign the book before and I didn't. And now I realize why. Because it was meant for you. So you'll have to sign it to her. There you go. Perfect. Do we have any more questions on this side? Oh, please go ahead.
I was amazed at how many of my relatives that I heard about sounded like yours. And I had one of those interesting, lovable, crazy aunts. But I'm wondering what your main sources of information were other than newspapers.
The core of it and the real underlying stroke of luck behind it was that there were these 7 children who had one way or another left substantial accounts, detailed accounts, either through memoir. In 2-3 cases, there were memoirs which just meant for the family. Another, it was a book that had been written in Dutch. Another was about Shanghai, Gertrude Langer in Shanghai. She had given this she and her husband, who'd lived through the Shanghai ghetto, had given this really long interview to a documentary maker about Shanghai, where they just talked about everything about the years in Vienna and then living in Shanghai and getting to the US after that. And what the stroke of luck was that these were really the only 7 accounts out of the 80 that were full and detailed, and they were all so very different. They weren't all just people who'd gone to the UK or US and then assimilated and got on with their lives. They had extraordinary experiences that did just amaze me, and so that's the core of the book, and that's the kind of stroke of luck that makes the book.
It was like a gift that came to you, truly a gift. There's a lady over there. Maybe one more question. We'll let you decide. You are the boss. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much for the talk, and I look forward to reading the book. Do you have more information on this Austrian, you called it a resistance, like a resistance group, you called it a resistance now? And do you have any thoughts on why after 1933 there was not more armed Jewish resistance or armed united Jewish and non-Jewish resistance to Nazism? I mean, once the Nuremberg laws are proclaimed, you have the state of complete inequality and sort of harassment, legalized harassment, formally legalized harassment of Jews in Germany. I'm always surprised that there wasn't much more armed Jewish resistance. And please have this statement about the past and not the present.
Thank you very much.
So the first question is about the Austrian resistance. Who were they?
Yeah, there is a good source in English. There was a woman who kind of became their personal historians because she was part of the cell and wrote it all down there. It's all there in the Resistance Museum in Vienna and in some German language books, but there is not a satisfactory English or French language documentation about that. On the wider question, I think that's a really interesting, fascinating question. If I can put in a plug from my friend and colleague Jonathan Friedland, who's brought out an amazing book called Escape Artist about the escapees from Auschwitz. He's writing a book at the moment about resistance in Germany. And I think it's good. He's a fantastic writer, a great researcher, and I think it will be a great book.
I think we have like another book author coming, right? We want to get him too.
You definitely are. I want to get Johnny Friedland, and you want to read Escape Artist, which
wonderful.
Is an amazing book.
As with any great book, we could talk to the author for many, many hours, but unfortunately that's all the time we have today. So once again, I want to thank you, Julian, for your time and for your beautiful book. Thank you, everybody.
Before we all end the commemoration, I just wanted to call out Cantor Daniel Benelo from the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue for the memorial prayer. At the same time, the candle lighting will be done by Francis Eitan Dortuk, who is second generation, and the son of Leo, who we miss very much.
Please kindly rise. El Malay Rachamim Shochen Bameromi Hametz Menucha Nechona Al Kanefei Hashechina Bema'alot Kedoshim Kedoshim Utehorim Kezohar Haratia Mazhirim Umeirim Lenishmotehem Shel Rivevot Alefei Israel Anashim Venashim Yeladim Viladot Shenehרגו ושנשחטו ושנשרפו ושנחנקו ונקברו חיים, וארצות אשר נגע בהן, כולם קדושים וטהורים, ובהם גאונים וצדיקים, ארזי הלבנון אדירי התורה, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויהי צרור בצרור החיים את נשמתם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבם, ונאמר אמן.
Recite the Kaddish very shortly with everyone.
Kaddish that we say is dedicated to the memory of those who were killed, who were assassinated on the Kristallnacht, and then a little bit later the victims of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, and more recently those murdered on October 7, 2023, and in the following at the terrorist attack and a fight in the Middle East. May their memory be a source of a blessing for all of us here, both Jews and non-Jews. And people who know the Kaddish, feel free to say it with me. יגדל ויקדש מרבה, ועמד יברח יותר ימי מלכותי, וחייבון ובימיכון וחיידך בית ישראל, בעגלה בזמן קריב ומואמן. יש מרבה ודבב לענם ולתי הניה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפר ויתרומם וינשא, ויתהדר ויתעלם, ויתחל שמי לקודשה וריחו. אלא נקרא בירתה נשיבתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דאמירת דמה ומואמן. יהא של הרבה מצ'מיה לכם עלינו ועל כל ישראל ומואמן. עושה שלום ומאמר ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ומואמן.
Thank you all so much for joining us here this evening. Thank you so much to Tara and to Julian. Please stay tuned for his book in April 2025. And also please stay tuned to the museum. Now is not the time for us to give up on Holocaust education. So I invite you to stay in touch and to keep showing up. Really, this is very much appreciated. Thank you.
Oh, it's going to be a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for coming.